our panelists' excellent sharing, my co-moderator, Professor Edward Lehman, the Managing Director of Lehman Li would like to address his comment and share his view for our eminent panelists and audience worldwide. Professor Lehman is the very first U.S. attorney in China, speaking much better Mandarin than me as a Chinese, and a true expert understands China than anyone else, as my experience. Professor Lehman mastered corporate commerce, fintech, IP, tax, and finance at the Foreign Legal Council. He is the only private practice lawyer in China appointed by State Administration of Foreign Export Affairs, which is an agency state council, also as a legal affairs commentator for CCTV, CGTN. He's a fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Science, the only Chinese government think tank organized of State Council. He's also the adjunct faculty, Tsinghua University, and China University of Politics and Law, board directors of Faculty of Law, Shanghai Jiao Tong University, Fulbright Fellow, Shanghai Fudan University, at the direction of the United States Information Agency. The program established American Study Department in Fudan University. Professor Lehman is a China legal advisor for World Bank, the first foreign lawyer approved to work as a China law firm. Elect governors, American Chamber of Commerce by American business community, both in Beijing and Shanghai. He's the founder and stakeholder of Lehman Bush PE, with the son of U.S. Former President George H.W. Bush and younger brother of the U.S. former President George W. Bush. After we have various IP strategy from our eminent panelists, Nagasawa-san from Canon, Dr. Kim from LG, Professor Su from MediaTek, and Ogawa-san from NTT Docomo, may Professor Lehman kindly share your view on the IP strategy in new era, in particular as a pioneer and early adopter ICQ, blockchain, cryptocurrency, digital asset, and fintech. Nevertheless, you are the first legal advisor of Bitcoin creator Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008.
Great. No, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I really appreciate it. And it's really great to be with you, Professor Wang, at the 2021 World Intellectual Property Forum. That we've got to adjust, as all good IP practitioners and all good IP strategists have to do, to the pandemic, and so we're online. And like you said, I mean, the first part, there have been some incredible panelists in the group that you expertly interviewed, and you know, where was Dr. Kim. And you explored, you know, sort of the background from LG, and Dr. Kim. He's you know, fought and litigated in over 50 countries with several hundred patent litigations, and you all you know, discussed the experiences and the skills and arts of how it is to litigate in those courtrooms around the world, and dealing with cross-licensing, mergers and acquisitions, and alternative and smart business measures based on intellectual property. You know, this whole thing is actually about trying to, you know, educate and pass on information at the very highest levels. So having Dr. Kim explaining also in his role at the Korean IP office as being one of the top IP offices in the world, along with the USPTO and the EPO and China and Japan, discussed the various measures there. So that was a really, you know, good insight into something that's very practical. And, you know, one thing that I have to say is dealing in intellectual property all these years and being among, you know, the first practitioners in the People's Republic of China, you know, really good learning and good practices go on that are sort of intergenerational in learning from other people. And so that's why also with your in-depth discussion with Professor Su at MediaTek, about the, you know, global, which is really a global fabless semiconductor company that enables nearly 2 billion connected devices each year to operate. And, you know, they're a market leader in developing innovative systems for mobile devices, home entertainment, and smartphones, tablets, digital televisions, 5G, and voice assistant devices, wearables. So their revenue is like $10 billion in 2020. I mean, it's not the absolute biggest outfit with regards to this, but it's a significant player. And I mean, Professor Su went through their IP and MediaTek's IP strategies, R&D business, and it was extremely insightful because it outlined major challenges for the IPR strategy for MediaTek going forward, and discussed about how they're doing it with acquisitions that started as far back as 2015, where they bought Richtech, MediaTek did, and in 2017 with Aroa Technology Corporation, and 2020 again with the affiliation with Pyron for power management chip, ASICs Electronics. So that was all very insightful. And then obviously the discussion with, Professor Agawa from NTD Docomo. Docomo, of course, is the predominant mobile phone operator in Japan, and it's the official, it has that abbreviation for sort of, doing things, what is do communications over mobile networks. And so it's great to hear from someone that is such a prime mover in that market and with intellectual property. And that was how he explained that most telecommunications operators do have interest in contributing in contributions compared to other manufacturers in this space. And he kind of went into obtaining standard essential patents, which has to do with 5G and how they're going to play a part in 5G, which is really going to put together the Internet of Things and is going to be rocket fuel for the future. So, Docomo is very unique, and that was exhibited in his presentation, and what they're doing with partnering with McAfee, the VirusScan mobile, and Android users, and it outlined sort of the global ambitions of NTD Docomo under the privatization of its ownership, which is, involved many meaningful government projects of applying 5G technology. So, like I said, as both, being a part of this panel, and Professor Wang has done a tremendous job putting this group together, and it's really a super high level group that you're not going to find anyplace else. And I just want to let people know the reason you have such a great level of folks, and the reason why the interviews and the panelists were so forthcoming is because of Professor Wang and her relationships, and because of what's happened with World Intellectual Property Forum. This is a really unique situation. And like I said, I mean, my father and grandfather were both involved in intellectual property, industrial design. And so I've been to a lot of conferences and interacted with a lot of folks. And there's really nobody like Professor Wang, Mei Hsin, that has really been a maven connecting intellectual property people together. And when you take a look at people like Docomo or LG or Canon, I mean, for example, Canon was another panelist that was interviewed, and Dr. Nagasawa, he's general counsel and head of intellectual property. He was saying in his interview that he's involved currently now with 10 to 15 litigations worldwide, and they're in the Canon is among the top 5 patent applicants in the United States for 35 years in a row, and has been #1 in Japan for the last 16 years. And the only time you're going to get folks like this to be forthcoming is someone like Professor Wang who's put it together. So I thought that was very insightful, and the Canon, that Dr. Nagasawa was talking about how some folks take patents and monetize them, and or if things get rough, they decide to go ahead and sell them off in some way, shape, or form. And we've seen that with some of our panelists talking about acquisitions from other major companies. So So yeah, I think that this has been for someone at a very high level. I think that there's takeaways from all these panelists, and for folks that are newcomers, you can certainly see that where the trend is going with regards to this new era of intellectual property. And it's come a long way in a short period of time. And one of the things that you mentioned, Professor Wang, was the fact that about Satoshi Nakamoto, and that whole thing. Satoshi Nakamoto is not just one person, but it's a number of people that invented essentially Bitcoin, which was really the first blockchain iteration. And so blockchain is kind of the wave of the future, and what you're seeing with regards to frictionless payments is really thankful to Satoshi Nakamoto, and I got involved in this in a very obtuse way in China. The one thing that has been interesting being in China for all these years is that that everyone sort of comes through here at one point or another, and good, bad, or indifferent. And as a result, everyone looks at the growth of the China market and being involved in blockchain and Bitcoin, and with some of these characters, infamous, notorious, whatever you want to say, they've come and been in and out and through China as well. And I think that the tremendous growth is going to happen in this era, in this age of frictionless economy and with blockchain, so, and with 5G and the SEPs with 5G. So that's a little bit of my summary on what we saw from some of the superstars that are in this panel, and it was something else.
Thank you very much for the highlight about the conference, our speakers, and also the stories behind for the Bitcoins. There are questions coming just now because audience, they see through your profound background and knowledges and connections worldwide. They're wondering, as the founder and stakeholder of the Lehman Bush PE firm with the presidents in the United States, and actually you entered China during a very early stage before China even opened their door to the whole world. So would you mind sharing the history for actually you have been in China for about 3 decades, and what's your view, your visions for your business, and what is the current development about this Lehman Bush PE firm?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for asking. I mean, the reason Lehman Bush came into existence, of course, was a relationship that was developed with the Bush family. I mean, they were among. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush, and this predated my time, certainly was stationed in Beijing in the 70s. I didn't come until the 80s. He was a constant visitor, and as was other folks in his family over the years, and then. And I got to know them as a result of that, and through various other friends and relations. But really, I was trained as a lawyer and started out as a lawyer. But the way that Chinese law works is that there were some restrictions in the 80s and 90s, and even up until very recently with the U.S.-China trade. Let's call it a dispute or misunderstanding. Whereby some of the foreign direct investment was prohibited or was limited as to what kind of shareholding could be held by a foreign company. So what happened were there were a lot of opportunities that foreign direct investors needed to be involved in, and then the shareholding had to be held by a Chinese legal person. A foreign invested enterprise like Lehman Bush, what became Lehman Bush, was holding some of those shares in these things in order to safeguard, many times in an escrow-like situation. Though the need for that sort of has fallen away, where the legal firm was holding these shares in escrow, and then it got involved through my relationship with Neil Bush, who was became this shareholder in Lehman Bush. And then we looked at different kinds of investment, and most of them, it's been wide ranging, but we were, like anything, necessity is the mother of invention. When you look at Bitcoin and when you look at blockchain, that came after the 2008 financial crisis. That came after, some negative reaction and some difficulty with the economy of the world at that time. And it was the same with Lehman Bush. It really came by where synergies came together. And now that private equity firm, we've been going on almost close to 20 years now. And it's served a purpose for, not only our interest in investment, but and with other folks, but also foreign direct investment in areas that are now open to a lot of different people. So we got a bit of a head start, but it's been a wild ride, and it is certainly something I did not contemplate, and it's not something, anybody who went to law school, unfortunately, was trained in the law and not necessarily in business. So it was business in real time, learning things. Whereas people like Neil Bush, he has a master's in business administration, so he's a geologist, but then trained in business, and so that was helpful. And then the synergies with other people who participated have made Lehman Bush into something that is extraordinary, I think. So thanks for asking.
Highly appreciate for Professor Lehman's very comprehensive sharing your China experiences. Before we close the panel, audience would like to hear from you with your profound and singular background, an American knowing China so much and living in China for over 30 years. What would be your recommendation for corporates in China or foreign companies to enter China for business under current US and China trade conflicts? Moreover, if you were the CEO or Chief Legal Counsel of Huawei or ZTE, these two leading 5G standard essential panel holders, what would be your strategy for the current era?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Professor Wang. I tell you, I think that having observed and worked with, legal counsel, general counsel, intellectual property counsel worldwide, the one thing that I have to note is that, we in the intellectual property area are not necessarily the drivers with regards to multinational corporations. And that's a shame, and that's something that should be corrected. So there was this crossover. If you look back, and I'm going to speak sort of hyperbolically, when you look at something like Apple computer, someone says, oh, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, they moved over from the engineering part. Steve Jobs didn't even graduate from university, but certainly Wozniak and him worked together as a team, and they came up with innovation. And innovation, whatever that is, which is inside Apple today, is still resonating with consumers. That would be something, whether it's true or not, is on the cutting edge. But they made that movement. Steve Wozniak worked at IBM. He worked for Big Blue, and he was one of these folks that was, a salary guy, and he made the transition from being a salary guy at IBM to being what he is today. And then Steve Jobs, of course, never entered into that. But what we see is these guys have become rock stars. What we don't see in multinational corporations is intellectual property lawyers, unfortunately, and general counsel from intellectual property, although the greatest value is accumulated from intellectual property. These are not folks that have worked into the C-suite executives. And I think that multinational corporations have to kind of give a rethink as to that, because that's the greatest keeper of wealth is the intellectual property department. The decisions oftentimes aren't necessarily made by the intellectual property department. And some of that, as an observation, has been the type of person who goes into prosecution of intellectual property is a certain kind of character, and that character doesn't necessarily lend itself often to being a C-suite executive who's calling these shots. A guy like Steve Jobs, and just to go back to him, was, a sort of a disagreeable person, was somebody who was pushing people in the intellectual property department, in pushing, and some say cheating, Steve Wozniak, who was an innovator. I mean, if you see any of the biographies or read any of them, that Steve Jobs sort of took advantage of the intellectual property person or the engineer, which is Steve Wozniak. And I'm not saying that in any kind of caustic way. I'm just giving an observation. So what I see in my best recommendation for folks now in the intellectual property department is try to use that leverage to have profound impact on on what's happening with the C-suite, with the decision makers. And almost universally, like I said, I don't see those folks, although they're very important to us in the intellectual property field, amongst intellectual property lawyers, but we don't see them impacting decisions on the C-suite. And just like there's been this movement to create equality or diversity in the boardrooms, I think intellectual property lawyers need to also stand their ground. So that's a very broad kind of an approach, but I think that you'll find some incredibly innovative thinkers in that department. With regards to what they should look for, I mean, what you're seeing even now, I think 2 days ago, Huawei, and you brought this up, Professor Wang, that 2 days ago, Huawei, or was it thereabouts, they had made an announcement, certainly in March, that they were going to be charging out for standard essential patents in 5G. Huawei, as you probably know, is, I think, China's largest patent protector within China and outside of China, I believe, of any Chinese company. And ZTE is somewhere in there as well.
Yes.
So you're seeing a lot of intellectual property, and those are granted rights. And then the question is, now they're finally starting to charge for them. And this may be, a fallout from the U.S.-China trade wars. But it's also kind of a direction where you're seeing where they had been leaving money on the table, okay? And they also have to try to, along with some of your other guests, I mean, Docomo and other people are involved in 5G and standard essential patents. So the question is kind of a foot race as to who are going to be the SEPs with regards to 5G. And so they've taken a whack at that. And that is going to be probably the most profound change that will affect all of us, because it has to do with the Internet of Things, which is this communication between all these sort of things that are within our offices, within our household, within our automobiles, and how we move and act in the future. And so this is, really a super big frontier that we are entering in. And I think many of us as intellectual property lawyers and folks who are actually commanding intellectual property portfolios, probably like a frog that's simmering in the boil, in boiling water. It happens very slowly and then very fast. And I think that people don't understand that they've got to start to play in that game. It's not just about prosecution. It's not necessarily always just about litigation, but it's about how do you actually make those things work for you. And I don't work for you which as far as SEPs, with cross licensing, with putting together a way to best utilize the monetary advantage with that portfolio that you have. And the problem is that laypersons and people in the C-suite don't really understand the gravity of the value of these things, as well as the people in the intellectual property department. So that's what my best advice to them would be: obviously continue to, have as much protection, as broad a protection as you can get with your patent portfolios. There's always this. I don't think Huawei and ZTE are the problems necessarily with who needs advice, because they're going like crazy. I think that the North America and other foreign markets have a real hard time sometimes protecting their intellectual property in China, in other jurisdictions too, because they say something as absurd as, well, there's no protection there, or they're listening to mainstream media with regards to the idea that there's intellectual property theft. Yes, there is intellectual property theft, but you waive intellectual property protection if you don't protect it. And I think everyone, that's listening to this certainly understands that notion. But, I get it from, people from my country, certainly, that they're not protecting their, and then as a result, there's perceived intellectual property theft or protection, but there really isn't technically, because they didn't protect their rights there in the first place. So I think that, people need to get their skates on from other parts of the world and participate. I mean, China is in a lot of different areas the largest intellectual property, what a place where the people are protecting now in the world with regards to trademarks, with regards to utility patents and design patents. So you're seeing a great surge with that. A lot of those are coming from within China. So so that's growing. So my recommendation certainly would be, God protects the protected, monetize what you have. Otherwise, you're just, it's just kind of a waste of time, energy, and effort to go ahead and protect that stuff. And, I look at some of the intellectual property portfolios for some universities, for example. They're not utilizing 100% or 80% of their portfolios, and that actually could come and create money as opposed to looking for money from donors. So that would be kind of my message of going forward. It's a kind of a general message. It's one that seems obvious at first blush, but I don't see enough participation of people on C-suite executives and monetization of these intellectual property rights that where they can really make the company grow exponentially. I remember when I was a law student, and this is so long ago now, but and my property professor, that was real property, said, how does somebody become wealthy? And everyone's kind of like thinking, well, get a good job, I guess. And his answer was, own something that appreciates rapidly. And intellectual property is exactly that. Real property is that. I think Chinese people, Asian people understand it. But I think that the C-suite executives, not the folks who are necessarily listening to this, don't necessarily understand that message. And part of our problem is we're not communicating as IP professionals to the multinational corporation C-suite executives to be able to utilize these things well. So, and make decisions for the company. So that's my wish going forward in the new era, certainly, Professor Wang.
Thank you very much for so many highlights and your insightful experience with the true cases behind the scene. We sincerely hope we can meet you soon in the near future to learn more highlights on how the world economy could be better through applying technology, intellectual property, and also the wisdom from the human being. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Lehman, and thank you for all our eminent panelists, Nagasawa-san, Dr. Kim, Professor Su, Ogawa-san. Thank you so much for such meaningful and insightful knowledge sharing with true stories behind the scene. We sincerely hope we can meet you all again in the near future to learn more highlights how this world economy could be better through applying technology and intellectual property monetization. Thank you all, sir. And thank you for all our audience as well. And see you soon.